So, if you haven't heard about this yet, Hungary is planning as of September 2019 to ban gender studies programs at their universities. Now, I've looked through about 20 different articles, all of which I'll link in the description, and I still can't determine exactly how this affects private universities. From the looks of this, it doesn't affect it at all. Like most articles I could find did not mention private universities at all. They only mentioned that Hungary wasn't necessarily banning gender studies so much as they were just removing funding for gender studies at public universities, which I guess you could say is a ban on public universities or on gender studies at public universities. But in this article, it says here, universities and academies in Europe and the US are urging the Hungarian government to withdraw proposed legislation that would effectively ban courses in gender studies in both public and private institutions. The government says that it no longer wishes to accredit and finance such programs because of the low number of graduates and a poor track record of employability. So I see two statements here that are somewhat contradictory, or at least something that I can't fully understand. I've looked it up, and to the best of my knowledge that I could find, there are such things as private universities in Hungary. It is not an entire government monopoly. Now, I know there's a bunch. There's like at least 10 or 20 of them. I don't know if there's 400 public universities for those few private ones. I don't know what the ratio is. I just know there are at least some private universities. And it says here that it would affect both public and private. And here it says the government does not want to accredit or finance such programs. So I'm assuming it's not going to finance and publicly fund public gender studies at universities. And it also means that it won't accredit the ones at private universities. I don't know if Hungary's government accredits private university degrees or not. But it's the debate on this is interesting because is it a free speech issue? That's the big question. Or is it a win for like individual freedom and property rights and all that? And this is why it matters so much as whether or not it affects private universities. Because if it is a blanket ban on gender studies, period, and it includes like, as in I cannot start a class at a private university that receives no government funding and teach gender studies, if I can't do that in Hungary, then yes, that's a violation of free speech, and I would oppose it, no matter how much I despise gender studies as a program and think it's total pseudoscience. If it is blocking that, then I'm against it. But I have not seen that. This is the closest thing I could find on the internet that suggests that it's affecting private institutions. Now, if it's just banning it in public universities, if it refuses to fund it in public universities, then I fully support it. I fully support it because I do not see how it's right for taxpayer-funded dollars to go to such an to go to fund gender studies. It's honestly, it's with anything. Like if they were to say with biology, this is where some people might lose me here, but if they were to announce that they are going to no longer fund studies in biology or cancer research or chemistry or any kind of science or any kind of research, if they were going to ban public funding of that, I am also okay with that because I don't think it's right for taxpayer-funded dollars to go to really any sort of funding or any sort of research or any sort of education. I think the private market can do that fine. And again, remember that once you start allowing the government to start funding certain research or certain things like gender studies, then it's not up to the universities. It's not up to society. It's up to government to decide what should be supported. And when it comes to things like cancer research, it's honestly the same thing of if people want it, they will fund it. It's something like it's a very small percentage of government funding that funds of total funding of like the sciences and research into disease and medicine and that. Like public governments do not do that much for science research. It's something like if you were to cut all funding, all public government funding across the world for like disease research, it honestly wouldn't be that bad. Like there's still tons of private funding there. And honestly, like, it would go back to the taxpayers, and the taxpayers could decide to continue funding that. I'm sure that if you were to announce that these kind of things were to lose funding, you get a ton of surge in donations, as we have seen that happens with everything. Every time funding is under threat for a private organization, the amount of donations go up. It's like when people were saying, take that, conservatives, like when they were going to try to remove funding from Planned Parenthood donations went up. It's like, okay, so you're proving that they don't need public funding. things like that. But yeah, the whole point of this, it's not a free speech issue if it does not affect private universities, because if it's publicly funding, then when the government starts removing public funding for things, that is better. Because instead of going to whatever that was, it should go back in the hands of the taxpayers. And then now, like, chances are that the Hungarian government will probably take that funding and put it into something else, which I think is dumb. But if they were to give that back to the taxpayers, that's fine. If they want to start removing funding from things, I don't care what it is, I fully support it. I don't think that's a violation of free speech, because again, it's not free speech to, like, free speech says you don't have a right to receive public funding, to receive taxpayer dollars for whatever you're going to say. So honestly, like, I see people saying this is hypocrisy on the right wing, that they're no longer funding gender studies, but maybe I'm wrong, and they are banning it outright throughout every university, that even, like, no private organizations should start teaching that. And if that's the case, I'm against it. But this right here, these small paragraphs right here, is the only thing I could find that suggests it's private. Everything else just talks about, as it said here, accredit and finance. And it says down here, this row follows the announcement of, I'm not even going to pronounce that guy's name, a minister of the Hungarian Prime Minister's office, that as of September 19th, the government will not finance or accredit gender studies courses. The state does not wish to finance these educational activities, it says. The low number of students enrolled in these programs may be a powerful argument for terminating them, said Golias, I guess? I don't know. The Central European University and the Eötvös Loránd University, ELTE, the only institutions in Hungary that offer degrees in gender studies accredited by the government, were not consulted in advance and had less than 24 hours to react to the proposal. Okay, so from what I'm told, at least the Central European University is private. So if they're receiving taxpayer funding in any way, like, because you can still be a private organization and receive taxpayer funding. If they're getting taxpayer funding, I think it should be pulled. No matter what they're teaching, it should be pulled. And I don't know about the Eötvös, how you pronounce that, university. I don't know if that's private or public, but again, if they're receiving taxpayer dollars, because that's certainly what it seems like, and that gets pulled, okay, I'm all for it. That's not a violation of freedom of speech to pull taxpayer funding from certain things. I get that it's biased. It's pulling it for gender studies and not for other programs. But honestly, like, to me, this is just step one. Like, I doubt they'll go further, but I wish they would. This is just step one to pulling back public funding of things. I don't think the public should fund anything at all, honestly. Like, anything, you can see how far that argument goes, but at least in the context of education, they should not do that. Like, we can do it purely, okay, like, we can do that fine in the private industries. So all I can recommend is, if it's just public universities, then that's fine. Nothing wrong with that. It is not it is not hypocritical in the slightest to oppose that, or to oppose public funding for gender studies. And again, of all the things to do it to, thank God it's gender studies, but if they're going to do it to any program, I'd be fine with that too. Don't take taxpayer funding, basically. No one deserves that. But yeah, that's, if you can find anything that says this definitely affects private universities, in the sense of, like, I guess they were accredited and now they're not going to be, that's a little sketchy. It's like, okay, but the government doesn't have a monopoly on accreditation, as to the best of my knowledge. Again, like, I don't see the difference, or I don't see how someone couldn't just say, oh, we're accredited by our own standards or by private standards. But yeah, that's honestly it. If you can clarify this, if you find anything that specifically says it affects private universities, then yeah, let me know in the comments section. Like the video if you enjoyed, subscribe for more, really helps me out a lot. And thanks for watching.